The shame was a physical weight, pressing down on Ayla's shoulders until her spine bowed. It lived in the hollow of her chest, a cold, dead thing that mimicked the wolf she did not have. Tonight, during the rite of the full moon, its presence was a roaring agony. All around her, the Silverwood pack shimmered with power, the air thick with the scent of pine, damp earth, and impending transformation. Laughter and boasts echoed through the clearing as warriors and hunters prepared to run with the moon. Ayla stood at the edge of the circle, near the low burning fires that cast long, dancing shadows. She was an Omega, the lowest of the low, but her status was worse than that. She was broken. At 20 years old, her shift had never come. She was wolfless, a flaw so profound in their society that it was a curse. Her sister Serena approached, her own powerful aura a stark contrast to Ayla's muted presence. Serena was everything Ayla was not. A strong beta warrior, her silver wolf renowned for its speed, her scent a confident melody of winter rose and steel. "You do not have to be here," Serena murmured, her voice a low comfort. "Yes, I do," Ayla whispered back, her gaze fixed on Alpha Marcus as he took his place on the high rock. To hide would be to admit the shame. "There is no shame in you, Ayla." But they both knew it was a lie, a kind one, but a lie nonetheless. In their world, a world built on the strength of the wolf, being without one was the ultimate failure. Alpha Marcus raised his hands, silencing the crowd. His voice boomed, filled with the gravelly power of his rank. "Tonight, we run. We honor the moon goddess who gives us our strength, our fury, our pack." A chorus of howls answered him. The energy in the clearing crescendoed, a palpable wave of primal instinct that Ayla could feel but never join. Then, the transformations began. The sickening, beautiful sound of bones cracking and reforming, of skin stretching over new muscle. One by one, her packmates shed their human forms, replaced by the magnificent beasts that were their true selves. Ayla watched, her heart a leaden stone in her chest. She felt a familiar, useless tingling under her skin, a phantom echo of a change that would never complete itself. It was a cruel mockery. Serena gave her hand a final, reassuring squeeze before she too succumbed, her body gracefully contorting into that of a sleek silver wolf who then trotted to join the others. She was alone again, a human island in a sea of wolves. Some of the younger members, not yet old enough to shift, watched her from the other side of the clearing with a mixture of pity and contempt. She was their future, if they failed. A cautionary tale. Alpha Marcus, now a hulking black wolf, threw his head back and let out a commanding howl that signaled the start of the run. The pack surged forward, a river of fur and muscle, and disappeared into the shadowed embrace of the forest. The clearing was suddenly empty, save for her and the crackling fires. The scent of their power lingered, a perfume of everything she could never be. She wrapped her thin arms around herself, the cold seeping in now that the body heat of the pack was gone. This was her existence, living in the shadow of their glory, a constant, painful reminder of her own deficiency. The following days were a blur of chores and averted gazes. As a wolfless Omega, Ayla's duties were confined to the packhouse kitchens and infirmary. She mended clothing, tended to the elderly, and cleaned up after the warriors. It was humbling work, meant to reinforce her lowly status. Yet, it was in these quiet, forgotten corners of the pack that her own strange gift manifested. Old Man Hemlock, a warrior whose wolf had faded with age, was often tormented by phantom pains in his legs. The pack healers offered him herbs that dulled his senses, but little else. Ayla found that if she simply sat with him, Humming a quiet, tuneless melody she'd invented as a child, his agitation would cease. The frantic, pained energy around him would soften, settling like dust. "You have a calming way about you, girl," he'd grumbled one afternoon, his eyes clearer than they'd been in weeks. A quiet spirit. She had just smiled, not daring to explain that it felt like more than that. It was as if she could feel the jagged edges of his pain, his spirit's turmoil, and instinctively knew how to smooth them. It wasn't healing, not in the way the pack healers understood it. It was settling, a quietening of the storm. This ability was useless in the eyes of her pack. They valued claws that could tear, jaws that could snap, and a warrior's heart that beat for battle. A soft hum and a quiet spirit were omega traits, to be commanded, not valued. That evening, a wave of alarm washed over the pack. A rider, his horse lathered and gasping, had arrived from the capital. He bore the seal of the Alpha King, King Ronan, a name that was only ever spoken in hushed, fearful whispers. He was a legend, a monster, a king who had united the warring packs through sheer, brutal force. It was said his wolf was the size of a bear, with eyes that burned like embers from the underworld. Alpha Marcus met the messenger in the great hall. Ayla, clearing away supper dishes, lingered in the shadows of the doorway, unable to quell her curiosity. The messenger, a grim-faced beta from the king's royal guard, unrolled a scroll. "By decree of the Alpha King, Ronan the Unbreakable," he announced, his voice echoing in the tense silence. "In light of the growing rogue threat on the eastern borders, every pack will provide a tribute. 10 of your strongest warriors, a tithe of your winter stores, and 1 omega of breeding age to serve at the royal citadel." A shocked murmur rippled through the assembled pack leaders. A tribute of warriors was expected. A tithe of food was a hardship, but manageable. But an omega? It was an ancient, almost forgotten custom. "To serve in what capacity?" Alpha Marcus asked, his voice tight. The messenger's gaze was cold. "The king's decree does not elaborate. You will choose one. She will leave with us at dawn." Ayla's blood ran cold. 1 omega. Her mind immediately flew to the other young women, her friends, who would be terrified. Then she saw the way Alpha Marcus's eyes scanned the room. His gaze passed over the other omegas, the healthy, strong ones who might one day bear pups. His eyes did not linger on them. They flickered, just for a second, towards the darkened doorway where Ayla stood. And in that fleeting moment she understood. This was a solution for him, a way to rid his pack of its single, shameful flaw, a way to offer a tribute that cost him nothing of value. He would send the broken one. He would send her. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through Ayla's resignation. She fled the great hall, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She had to find Serena. Her sister was her only protector, the only one who might speak against this. She found her by the training grounds, methodically sharpening a set of hunting knives. The metallic scrape of stone against steel was the only sound in the twilight. Serena looked up as Ayla approached, her brow furrowing in concern at the sight of Ayla's pale, stricken face. "What is it? What has happened?" "The tribute," Ayla choked out, the words tasting like ash. "Alpha Marcus. He is going to choose me." The knife fell from Serena's hand, clattering on the packed earth. Her expression hardened, her protective instincts flaring like a physical shield. "No, he would not dare. You are not fit for tribute. You cannot even shift." She said the words as if they were a defense, a reason for Ayla to be spared, but they only twisted the knife of shame already buried in Ayla's heart. "That is why he will choose me," Ayla whispered, her voice trembling. I am worthless to him. A broken offering he can give away without a second thought. Serena's hands clenched into fists. I will go to him. I will challenge his decision. No, Serena, you cannot. Ayla grabbed her sister's arm, her grip surprisingly strong. To challenge an alpha's decree over a tribute to the king, it is treason. He would have you flogged or worse. I will not let you be harmed for my sake. Then what are we to do? Serena cried, her composure finally cracking. Let him send you to that monster? The stories they tell of King Ronan, they say he is cruel, that his fortress is a place of shadows and pain. Ayla's resolve hardened, a small, stubborn ember glowing in the face of her fear. Then I will go. It is better than staying here, being a constant source of shame for you and for our family. Perhaps this is my purpose. To be given away. The words were bitter, but a strange sense of peace settled over her. Her fate had been decided. There was no more uncertainty, only the terrifying path ahead. Later that night, the official summons came. As expected, her name was called. She packed a small bag with a change of clothes and the small, smooth river stone her mother had given her before she died. It was her only memento. Serena held her tightly at the edge of the village as dawn painted the sky in bruised shades of purple and gray. Be strong, little sister, she whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. Remember, you are the daughter of a silverwood wolf, even if you do not wear the fur. Ayla nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She climbed into the Spartan carriage provided by the king's guards, not daring to look back. To look back would be to see the only home she had ever known, a place of pain and love intertwined, fading into the distance. She was being sent into the dark, a tribute for a monster king, and for the first time, she had no idea what her future held. The finality of it was both terrifying and, in a strange way, liberating. Her life as the pack's failure was over. A new, uncertain chapter was about to begin. The journey to the royal citadel was a brutal, week-long affair. The king's guards were silent, imposing figures who spoke only to give orders. They traveled hard and fast, their powerful war horses eating up the miles. Ayla was little more than cargo to them. They saw her as she had always been seen. An object, a piece of a political transaction. The landscape changed from the familiar, lush forests of her home to jagged, windswept mountains that clawed at a perpetually gray sky. The air grew colder, thinner. The citadel itself appeared first as a dark fang on the horizon, a shard of obsidian thrusting up from the highest peak. As they drew closer, its sheer scale became overwhelming. It was not built so much as carved from the mountain itself, a fortress of black stone and grim towers that seemed to absorb the light. There were no banners, no signs of life, only the mournful cry of wind whistling through its battlements. This was the lair of King Ronan. She was escorted through massive gates that closed behind her with a deafening boom, sealing her inside. The courtyard was filled with warriors clad in black and silver armor, their faces hard, their auras radiating a disciplined lethality that made her pack's warriors seem like pups in comparison. They all bore the scent of the king, ozone, cold stone, and a deep, primal musk that spoke of untamed power. It was intimidating, and it made the small human part of her want to curl into a ball. An older, severe-looking woman with her hair pulled into a tight bun met her at the entrance to the main keep. I am Elspeth, the Castellan. You are the tribute from Silverwood? I am Ayla. Elspeth's eyes flickered over her, a quick, dismissive appraisal. The king will see you now. Follow me. Do not speak unless spoken to. Do not meet his gaze unless he commands it. Do not touch anything. Her heart hammered against her ribs as Elspeth led her through cavernous, torchlit halls. The air was cold and still, heavy with the weight of ages. There were no decorations, no tapestries, only bare, black stone that seemed to drink the warmth from her body. The silence was the most unnerving part. A place with so many people should have been filled with noise, but the citadel was as quiet as a tomb. They arrived before a set of immense ironwood doors. The 2 guards standing sentinel did not so much as blink as Elspeth pushed them open. The tribute, Your Majesty. The throne room was vast and filled with shadows. At the far end, upon a throne that looked like it was forged from jagged rock and solidified shadow, sat the Alpha King. He was introduced by reputation first, and the reality was 1,000 times more terrifying. Ronan was a giant of a man, broader and taller than any wolf-shifter Ayla had ever seen. Clad in dark leathers, with a mantle of black wolf fur over his shoulders, he seemed less a man and more a primordial force of nature. Scars mapped his face, one particularly vicious one cutting through his eyebrow and down his cheek. His hair was the color of a moonless night, long and untamed. But it was his eyes that held her captive. They were not the burning embers of legend, but chips of ice, a startling pale silver that seemed to see right through her, stripping away her defenses and laying bare the trembling heart of her. His power was a physical pressure in the room, a crushing weight that demanded submission. This was an alpha of alphas, a true king. He did not speak, merely watched her as she was led to the center of the room. The silence stretched, taut and agonizing. Ayla kept her eyes fixed on the floor, her hands trembling at her sides, reciting Elspeth's instructions in her head like a prayer. "Look at me," he commanded. His voice was a low, rumbling growl that vibrated through the stone floor and up into her bones. Slowly, terrified, she lifted her head and met his gaze. The force of his stare was like a physical blow. She saw nothing in them, no cruelty, no anger, no curiosity. Only a vast, cold emptiness. He rose from his throne, and the sheer scale of him was even more apparent. He moved with a predator's grace, silent and deliberate, as he descended the steps and circled her. She felt like a mouse being inspected by a hawk. He stopped in front of her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. He inhaled deeply, his strange silver eyes narrowing. "You are wolfless," he stated. It was not a question. Shame burned her cheeks. "Yes, Your Majesty. Your alpha sends me a broken toy as tribute." His voice was flat, devoid of emotion, which was somehow more frightening than rage. Ayla found a sliver of defiance within her fear. "I am not a toy, Your Majesty." For the first time, a flicker of something moved in the depths of his icy eyes. Surprise? Annoyance? She could not tell. He leaned closer, and his scent overwhelmed her, the storm and stone, but something else beneath it, something wild and pained like a trapped animal. He reached out, and she flinched, expecting a blow. But his fingers, rough and calloused, merely brushed a stray strand of hair from her face. The brief contact sent a jolt, a strange spark of warmth, through her. He froze, his hand hovering near her cheek. A tremor, almost imperceptible, ran through his powerful frame. He snatched his hand back as if burned, his expression shuddered once more. "Take her to my chambers," he ordered, turning his back on her abruptly. "She will serve me there." Elspeth bowed low. "Yes, my king." As Ayla was led away, she dared one last glance back. King Ronan stood staring into the fire, his fists clenched at his sides. In his rigid posture, she saw not the indifference of a powerful king, but the tightly coiled tension of a man fighting a battle she could not begin to understand. And she had seen, just for a moment, the flicker of a hidden wound. The king's chambers were a world of their own, a vast suite of rooms at the highest point of the citadel. There was a sitting room with a massive fireplace, a study lined with ancient books, and a bedroom dominated by a bed so large it could have slept 4 men. Everything was carved from the same dark wood and black stone, furnished with furs and unadorned leather. It was a space built for function and power, not comfort. It was a cage, albeit a gilded one. Ayla's duties were simple and strange. She was to keep the fire lit, bring him his meals which he took alone in his study, and otherwise remain silent and out of sight in a small antechamber. She was a ghost in his private world. He rarely spoke to her. Days would pass where the only sign of his presence was the empty tray she collected or the faint scent of ozone he left in his wake. He was a creature of the night, often leaving for hours only to return in the pre-dawn darkness, carrying with him the chill of the mountain air and the scent of blood. Animal, she prayed. Despite the fear he inspired, Ayla was a keen observer. She began to notice the small cracks in his formidable armor. He never slept through the night. She would hear him pacing his study, the heavy, restless tread of a caged predator. Sometimes a low growl of pain would escape his lips, quickly stifled. He favored his left side, and on the nights when the moon was full, he would lock himself in his room, and the sounds that filtered through the thick door were not those of a powerful alpha reveling in his strength, but of a man in torment. Her strange ability, the one that had been so useless at home, seemed to resonate in the tense atmosphere of his chambers. The air around him was always tight, a coiled spring of violent energy. When she was near, especially when he was unaware of her presence, she felt that energy lessen, just slightly. The jagged edges of his aura seemed to smooth out. One evening, she brought his supper tray to the study. He was not at his desk as usual. A low groan from the adjoining bedroom drew her attention. Pushing the door open a crack, she peeked inside. He was on the floor, leaning against the bed, his head in his hands. His breathing was harsh and ragged, and his entire body was rigid with tension. The air in the room was electric with his pain. Her training, her fear, everything screamed at her to retreat, to leave him to his private agony. But the sight of this immensely powerful man brought so low stirred something else in her, compassion, and the instinct to soothe. Quietly, she entered the room. He did not seem to notice her. His focus was entirely inward, on the battle he was waging. She knelt a few feet away, not daring to get closer. She did not speak. Instead, she began to hum. It was the same simple, tuneless melody she had used for Old Man Hemlock, a sound that came from the deepest, quietest part of her. At first, there was no change. Then, slowly, the rigid line of his shoulders began to relax. The harsh, grating sound of his breathing softened, deepening into a more regular rhythm. The oppressive energy in the room began to dissipate, like smoke clearing after a fire. He lifted his head, and his silver eyes, clouded with pain, found hers. He looked surprised, as if he had only just realized she was there. He did not look angry. He just looked weary. "What are you doing?" he rasped, his voice rough. I do not know, Your Majesty," she stammered, her humming ceasing abruptly. "I heard you. I thought." He continued to stare at her, his expression unreadable. The moment stretched, and Ayla was sure he would cast her out. Or worse. "Do not stop," he said, his voice barely a whisper. Hesitantly, she began to hum again. She watched as the tension bled from him, his massive frame slumping in relief. He closed his eyes, leaning his head back against the bed. For the first time since she had arrived, King Ronan, the Unbreakable, looked peaceful. He had a secret agony, a deep and terrible vulnerability, and somehow, she, the broken Omega, was the only thing that could touch it. That night marked a subtle but profound shift in their dynamic. Ronan did not speak of the incident, and Ayla did not dare to bring it up. But he no longer confined her to the antechamber. He began to allow her presence in his study while he worked, sitting in a chair by the fire. Her silent companionship seemed to be enough. He was a man consumed by duty. Scrolls and maps littered his desk, reports from border patrols, trade agreements, and letters detailing the squabbles of his vassal alphas. He ruled with an iron fist because his kingdom was perpetually on the brink of chaos. She saw the immense burden he carried, the weight of 1,000 lives on his shoulders. Sometimes, when the pressure in the room grew too thick with his frustration, she would hum softly. He never acknowledged it, but the tight set of his jaw would loosen. His pen would move more smoothly across the parchment. She became his living balm, a quiet counterpoint to the storm that raged both within him and without. Their fragile peace was shattered by the arrival of his uncle, Lord Cassian. Cassian was Ronan's opposite in many ways. Where Ronan was a monolith of raw power, Cassian was sleek and polished, a courtier with a serpent smile. He was the head of the king's council, a position that gave him significant influence. He arrived at the king's chambers unannounced, striding in as if he owned the place. His eyes, a dark and clever brown, landed on Ayla immediately. A sneer twisted his lips. "Brother's son," he said, his voice smooth as oiled leather, though his gaze remained on her. "I see you have acquired a new pet. This is the tribute from Silverwood? I had heard they sent something defective." Ronan's head snapped up from his work. A low growl rumbled in his chest, a sound so menacing it made the very air vibrate. "She is under my protection, Cassian. Watch your tongue." Cassian raised an eyebrow, feigning surprise. "Protection? For an Omega? And a wolfless one at that? Surely your standards have not fallen so low," the court is whispering. They wonder why the king closets himself away with this nothing. "Let them whisper," Ronan said, his voice dropping to a deadly calm. "Their opinions are of no consequence to me. State your business and leave." The thinly veiled animosity between them was a toxic fog in the room. Cassian's smile never wavered, but his eyes were hard. "The council grows concerned about your isolation. The rogue packs are becoming bolder. They see a king who hides in his mountain, and they smell weakness. They say the curse is finally taking its toll." At the word curse, the atmosphere turned glacial. Ronan rose slowly to his feet, his full, intimidating height a clear threat. "My strength is not a matter for your council's debate. The rogues will be dealt with. Now get out." Cassian gave a theatrical bow. "As you wish, Your Majesty." His gaze swept over Ayla one last time, filled with a chilling mixture of contempt and calculation. "A word of advice, little mouse. Be careful whose cage you choose to inhabit. The bars here are very, very cold." With that parting shot, he was gone. Ronan stood motionless for a long time, his back to her. The storm inside him was raging again, she could feel it. The calm she had so carefully cultivated had been ripped away. Hesitantly, she moved to his side. "My lord?" she whispered. He turned, and the anguish in his eyes stole her breath. It was raw, unguarded. "He is right," he bit out, his voice laced with self-loathing. "They all see it. The weakness, the rot. I do not see weakness, Ayla said, her voice quiet but firm. I see a man carrying a burden heavier than any mountain. His gaze softened, the storm receding to a troubled sea. He reached out, his hand hesitating before his fingers gently tucked a strand of her hair behind her ear. It was the same gesture as their first meeting, but this time there was no flinching away. There was only a profound, aching sadness. You see what you want to see, Ayla, he murmured. You do not know the monster that I am. But Ayla was beginning to suspect that the true monster was not King Ronan, but the curse that held him captive. And his uncle seemed to know exactly how to twist that key. Ronan found himself seeking her presence more and more. He started taking his meals at the small table near the fire, with her sitting opposite him. Their conversations were stilted at first. He would ask about her home, her family. She, in turn, learned about the kingdom through his weary complaints about stubborn alphas and dwindling resources. One evening, she found the courage to ask about the books in his study. Did you read all of them? A flicker of a smile, the first she had ever seen, touched his lips. Most of them. My father believed a king should have a mind as sharp as his claws. My mother used to tell me stories, Ayla confided, her voice soft with memory. Tales of the first wolves, of the moon goddess and the sun god who fought for her affection. Fairy tales, Ronan grunted, but his tone lacked its usual harshness. Perhaps, she said, but they made the world feel bigger, more magical. He fell silent, his gaze distant. A long moment passed before he spoke again, his voice low. Tell me one. Surprised, she hesitated for a moment, then began to recount the tale of how the wolf got its howl, a story of love and loss, and a song meant to reach the cold, distant moon. She had a storyteller's gift, her voice weaving pictures in the air. As she spoke, she watched him. The hard lines of his face softened. The eternal vigilance in his eyes eased. He was not just listening, he was absorbing the story, letting it fill the empty, painful spaces inside him. From then on, it became their ritual. Every night after the work was done, she would tell him a story. She shared the legends of her pack, the silly tales of her childhood, the fables her mother had cherished. And in those moments he was not Ronan the Unbreakable, the monster king. He was just Ronan, a man listening to a story by the fire. She was a balm, a quiet song, a gentle story. He was beginning to realize, with a dawning sense of terror and wonder, that she was becoming essential. His wolf, the raging beast that had been his constant tormentor since the curse took root in his boyhood, grew quiet when she was near. The gnawing pain that was his constant companion subsided to a dull ache. For the first time in years, he was sleeping through the night, lulled into a peaceful darkness by the memory of her voice. He was becoming dependent on her. The thought terrified him. Dependence was weakness. Lord Cassian was right. The court saw her as a flaw, a chink in his armor. And yet, he could not bring himself to send her away. To do so would be to invite the storm back in, stronger than ever. One afternoon, Gareth, his beta and closest friend, came to the chambers to deliver a report. Gareth was a steady, loyal wolf, his face a roadmap of battles fought at Ronan's side. He saw Ayla sitting by the fire, mending one of Ronan's tunics, and his eyebrows shot up. The tribute remains, he commented later, when Ayla had left to fetch them some wine. His tone was neutral, but the question was clear. She is useful, Ronan said, his voice clipped. Gareth was not fooled. She is a wolfless omega, Ronan. Cassian is using her presence to sow dissent among the council. They say you are bewitched, that you have lost your edge. My edge is my own concern, Ronan snarled. Is it? Gareth pressed, his loyalty giving him the courage to challenge his king. The rogue threat is not an invention of Cassian's. They sacked the village of Stone Creek last night, slaughtered a dozen of our people. They are led by a new alpha, one who calls himself Fenris. He claims you are unfit to rule, that your bloodline is tainted. Ronan slammed his fist on the desk, the wood groaning in protest. The curse. Fenris must have heard the rumors. The girl, Gareth continued, his voice softer. She has a strange effect on you. I have not seen you this calm since we were boys, before the curse took hold. But that calm could be mistaken for complacency. You must make a show of strength. Lead a war party. Remind them why they fear you. Ronan knew Gareth was right. He had been so immersed in the quiet peace Ayla provided that he had let his grip on the kingdom slip. He had to remind his enemies and his allies who he was. He had to unleash the beast. The thought filled him with a cold dread. Unleashing the beast meant feeding the curse, and he did not know if he could contain it without Ayla near. The news of the Stone Creek massacre spread through the citadel like a plague. The atmosphere, once merely tense, was now thick with fear and anger. Ayla could feel the change in Ronan immediately. The peace she had cultivated around him was gone, replaced by the familiar, violent storm. He paced his chambers like a caged lion, the predator in him awakened. He barely looked at her. He stopped taking his meals with her. The storytelling ritual was forgotten. He was once again the cold, distant king, and the wall between them felt higher than ever. The rejection was a physical ache in her chest. She had foolishly allowed herself to believe she was more than just a tool, more than a calming servant. Now she was reminded of her place. One evening she heard raised voices from the study. It was Ronan and Lord Cassian. "You must ride out." Cassian's voice was sharp, insistent. "You must answer this challenge from Fenris with blood and fire. Anything less is cowardice." "I will choose the time and place of my battles, uncle." Ronan's voice was a low, dangerous growl. "Or perhaps you no longer have the stomach for them? Perhaps you would rather stay here and have stories whispered to you by your Omega pet?" There was a crash, the sound of wood splintering. Ayla flinched. "Do not speak of her again," Ronan snarled, his voice vibrating with barely controlled fury. "I am assembling the war council. We ride out in 3 days. Now leave my sight." Ayla retreated to her antechamber, her heart pounding. He was going to war. He was going to face this Fenris, to meet violence with violence. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that embracing that part of himself would feed the curse that plagued him. It would strengthen the monster within. Later that night, long after Cassian had gone, she found Ronan in his study, staring at a map of the Eastern Territories. His face was grim, his eyes shadowed with a terrible conflict. "Your Majesty," she began, her voice small. He looked up, and for a moment, the mask of the king slipped. She saw the tormented man beneath. "Ayla." She gathered her courage. "You do not have to do this. There are other ways than battle." "Are there?" He gave a harsh, mirthless laugh. "In my world, strength is the only language understood. Blood is the only currency with any value. Your stories are for the fireside, not the battlefield." The words were a dismissal, but she pressed on. "The strength I see in you is not just in your fists. It is here." She bravely tapped her own temple. "And here." She touched her chest, over her heart. "Cassian and men like him, they want you to be the monster. It is easier for them to understand. It is easier for them to control." He stared at her, his silver eyes wide with a mixture of shock and something else she could not name. No one had ever spoken to him like this. No one had ever dared to look past the Alpha King and see the man. He crossed the room in 2 long strides, stopping directly in front of her. He was so close, his presence was an overwhelming force. He lifted a hand as if to touch her cheek, but then let it fall. The internal battle was plain on his face. "You know nothing of my world," he whispered, his voice hoarse with emotion. "You know nothing of the darkness I hold inside me. To fight Fenris, I must unleash it. And I fear this time, I will not be able to cage it again." In that moment of raw vulnerability, she saw the full truth. His curse was not just a source of pain, it was a corrupting force that he fought every single day, and he was terrified of losing. Without thinking, she reached out and placed her small hand on his chest over his heart. She could feel its frantic, powerful beat beneath her palm. "You will not lose," she said, her voice filled with a conviction that surprised them both. "Because you are not alone in this fight anymore." He looked down at her hand, then back to her face. A powerful, undeniable energy surged between them, a current of recognition that went deeper than thought, deeper than words. It was the first terrifying thrum of the mate bond, awakening in the heart of the storm. He recoiled as if struck by lightning, his eyes wide with horror and disbelief. He stumbled back, putting distance between them. "Get out!" he choked out, turning away from her. "Leave me." Heartbroken and confused, Ayla fled the room, the invisible thread that had just sparked between them now feeling like a burning wire. For 2 days, Ronan was a phantom. He did not summon her, did not even seem to be in his chambers. Ayla was left in the echoing silence, her mind replaying his horrified reaction over and over. That spark, that connection she had felt. It had been real. She knew it. And it had terrified him. On the eve of his departure, she was arranging the books on his shelves when the door opened. It was not Ronan, but Lord Cassian. Ayla's blood ran cold. "Alone at last," he said, his smile predatory as he strolled into the room. The little mouse without her lion. "My lord," she said, dipping into a curtsy, her eyes on the floor. "The king is not here." "I know. He is with his warriors, preparing for a battle you foolishly tried to talk him out of." He circled her, much as Ronan had on their first meeting, but where Ronan's inspection had been cold, Cassian's was filled with a slimy sort of malice. "You are a curious thing. Utterly without power, and yet you seem to have a hold on him. I must admit, I am intrigued as to how." "I do not know what you mean," Ayla said, her voice trembling slightly. "Oh, I think you do," he purred. He stopped in front of her, invading her personal space. "He is damaged, my nephew. Has been since he was a boy. A darkness took root in him, a family affliction. He fights it, tries to pretend he is whole, but he is not. And you soothe him, do you not? Like a poultice on a festering wound. But you are not a cure, you are merely a distraction." His words were cruel, designed to cut, and they found their mark. He was voicing her deepest fears. "He will go to war," Cassian continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "He will unleash his rage, and the darkness will feast on it. He will come back more of a monster than when he left, and he will have no more use for a gentle little thing like you. He will cast you aside." He reached out and stroked her cheek with the back of his fingers. His touch was cold and reptilian, and Ayla recoiled, a gasp escaping her lips. "Or perhaps," Cassian mused, his eyes glittering, "you will find you need a new protector. Someone more stable, Someone who understands the subtle arts of power. Someone like me. The threat was unmistakable. He was not just trying to intimidate her. He was trying to claim her, to take the one thing that seemed to bring his nephew peace. Before Ayla could respond, the chamber doors burst open. Ronan stood there, clad in his black battle armor, his face a thunderous mask of fury. The wave of his rage was so powerful it was a physical force, making Cassian take an involuntary step back. "Touch her again," Ronan snarled, his voice a low promise of death. "And I will tear your throat out with my teeth." Cassian quickly composed himself, his oily smile returning. "My apologies, nephew. I was merely having a conversation with your servant." Ronan's silver eyes were fixed on Cassian, burning with a cold fire that was more terrifying than any open flame. "She is not your concern. Get out of my chambers, and if I ever find you alone with her again, the council will be looking for a new leader." The threat was absolute. Cassian's smile tightened, but he bowed his head in mock deference. "Of course, Your Majesty." He shot Ayla one last venomous look before sweeping out of the room. The silence that remained was heavy and fraught with unspoken words. Ronan's chest was heaving, the aftermath of his rage. He looked from the door where Cassian had disappeared to Ayla, who stood pale and trembling by the bookshelf. He strode towards her, and for a second she feared his anger was for her as well. But when he reached her, his expression was one of anguish. He raised his gauntleted hand, hesitated, and then gently, so gently, cupped her face. His thumb stroked the spot Cassian had touched, as if trying to wipe away the taint. "Did he harm you?" he asked, his voice raw. "No," she whispered. Relief washed over his features, followed by a wave of grim determination. "This is why you cannot be near me," he said, his voice rough with pain. "You are a beacon, and my world is full of shadows that will try to extinguish you. I am the greatest of them." He was pushing her away to protect her. The realization was a painful sort of comfort. "I am not afraid of the dark," she said, her voice gaining strength. "You should be," he murmured, his silver eyes searching hers. The bond between them flared again, stronger this time, an undeniable pull. He felt it. She saw the recognition, the fear, and the longing warring in his gaze. He let out a ragged breath and stepped back, breaking the contact. The loss of his touch was a physical pang. "When I return," he said, his voice formal and kingly once more, "we will discuss your future. It cannot be here." He turned and strode from the room without another word, leaving her alone with the echo of his touch and the terrifying knowledge that he was marching off to a battle that could destroy him from the inside out. Ronan rode at the head of his war host, the cold mountain wind whipping at his cloak. The beast inside him was awake, snarling for release. For years he had kept it on a tight leash, the curse a constant, agonizing pressure behind his ribs. Isla's presence had been like a cool hand on a fevered brow, lulling the monster into a fitful slumber. Now, without her, it thrashed against its cage, hungry. Gareth rode beside him, his expression grim. "You are quiet, my friend." "I am focused," Ronan replied, his voice a low growl. "You are thinking of the Omega." It was not a question. Ronan's jaw tightened. He could not deny it. Her face was imprinted on the inside of his eyelids, the feel of her small hand on his chest, the sound of her voice weaving stories in the firelight, the scent of her, wild honey and resilience. He had felt the snap of the mate bond, a thing of myth and legend he never thought he would experience, especially not with a wolfless Omega. The goddess had a cruel sense of humor. To give him a mate who was the embodiment of peace when his entire existence was a war. to give him a mate whose gentleness could be so easily crushed by the world he inhabited. He had to protect her, and the only way to do that was to keep her far away from him and the darkness that clung to his bloodline. He would win this battle, secure his border, and then send her away. To a quiet convent, a distant village, anywhere she would be safe. The thought was a shard of ice in his gut. "She has no place in this," Ronan said, more to himself than to Gareth. "Perhaps her place is whatever you make for her," Gareth countered quietly. "Perhaps a king's strength is not just in what he can destroy, but in what he can protect." They made camp in a hidden valley, 2 days' ride from Stone Creek. The scouts reported that Fenris and his rogue pack were holed up in the ruins of an old fort, confident in their numbers. They were savages, a pack forged from the outcasts and exiles of a dozen clans, united only by their hatred for the established order. That night, the curse chose to torment him. It was a clawing, burning agony that started in his bones and spread outwards. Black, shadowy tendrils, visible only to him, writhed under his skin. It was the ancestral magic of his bloodline, corrupted generations ago by a pact with a dark entity. It gave his family immense power, but at a terrible price. The beast it fed was not a true wolf, but something darker, something that hungered for rage and despair. He retreated from the camp, needing to be alone as he fought for control. He collapsed against a rock outcropping, his body convulsing. Sweat beaded on his brow, and a guttural cry of pain was ripped from his throat. He dug his fingers into the hard earth, anchoring himself, focusing on a single image to keep the monster at bay. Ayla's face, her clear, compassionate eyes. He imagined her humming, the simple melody a lifeline in the swirling chaos of his mind. He focused on the memory of her touch, a small point of warmth against the encroaching cold. For hours he battled, using his memory of her as a shield. Slowly, painfully, he forced the darkness back. He was left shaking and exhausted, but he was still himself. He had won, but it had taken everything he had. And he knew, with a chilling certainty, that the next time it would be harder. The more he used his rage in the coming battle, the more power he would feed the curse. Fenris was not just a threat to his kingdom, he was a threat to his very soul. And the one thing that could save him was miles away, locked in his fortress for her own safety. The irony was a bitter pill. The citadel was a prison of silence. Without Ronan's presence, the vast chambers felt empty and cold. Ayla spent her days in a state of anxious dread, her thoughts constantly flying east to the battlefield. She prayed to a goddess she was not sure even listened to wolfless girls, pleading for his safety. Her quiet routine was disrupted by Elspeth. The Castellan began assigning her menial, grueling tasks outside the king's chambers. She was sent to scrub floors in the barracks, haul water from the deep well, and work in the steaming heat of the kitchens. It was a clear message from Lord Cassian. Without the king's direct protection, she was just another Omega, and he wanted her to feel it. The other servants, following his lead, were cruel. They whispered insults as she passed, tripped her in the corridors, and gave her the most unpleasant jobs. She endured it all with a quiet dignity that seemed to infuriate them more. The shame was a familiar cloak, but it fit differently now. Before, she had believed their assessment of her. Now she knew her own worth, a secret value that only one other person had ever seen. One afternoon, while she was sorting through winter linens in a dusty storage room, she overheard 2 of Cassian's personal guards talking in the hallway. "The master is impatient," one said. "He expected word of the king's defeat by now." "Fenris is strong, but the king in his rage is a force of nature," the other replied. "But Cassian's plan is a good one." If Fenris cannot kill him, the king's own darkness will. Cassian says the curse feeds on bloodshed. This battle will either leave a corpse or a monster on the throne. Either way, Cassian wins. Isla froze, her blood turning to ice. A plan. This was not just a rogue uprising, it was a calculated move by Cassian to destroy Ronan. He had goaded Ronan into this fight, knowing it would push him to the brink. He was using Fenris as a weapon to unleash Ronan's curse and seize power in the aftermath. A desperate resolve filled her. She could not just sit here and wait for him to be destroyed. She had to do something. But what? She was a prisoner, a wolfless Omega with no allies and no power. Her mind raced. She thought of Gareth, the king's beta. He was loyal to Ronan, she had seen it in his eyes, but he was on the battlefield. There was no one here she could trust. No one but herself. She remembered the stories her mother used to tell, tales of clever rabbits outwitting fearsome wolves. Strength was not always about claws and teeth. Sometimes it was about knowing your enemy's weakness. Cassian's weakness was his arrogance. He saw her as nothing, a mouse to be toyed with. He would never expect her to be a threat. She had to get to Ronan. She had to warn him. More than that, she had to be with him. She was the only one who could soothe the beast, the only one who could counter the poison Cassian was so deliberately feeding into his soul. That night, she put her own plan into motion. She took a heavy cloak from the storage room and filled a small satchel with bread and a water skin from the kitchens. She knew the Citadel's layout from her chores, the delivery routes, the changing of the guards. She would wait until the deepest point of the night, during the shift change at the eastern supply gate. It was a long shot, a fool's hope. But it was better than doing nothing. For the first time in her life, Ayla was not waiting to be saved. She was going to be the rescuer. The escape was terrifyingly simple. Cassian's arrogance was indeed his weakness. No one was watching the wolfless Omega. No one believed she had the will or the courage to even try. She slipped through the supply gate behind a cart of empty barrels, her heart hammering in her chest, and melted into the pre-dawn gloom. The wilderness was a formidable foe. She was not a warrior or a tracker. She had only a general sense of direction, east, and the desperate hope that fueled her steps. She traveled for 2 days, sleeping in hollow logs and foraging for berries she vaguely remembered from childhood lessons. She was cold, hungry, and constantly terrified of the strange noises of the forest at night. But the image of Ronan, fighting a battle on 2 fronts, pushed her onward. On the 3rd day, she stumbled upon the remnants of a battlefield. The ground was churned to mud, stained with dark patches of dried blood. The air was thick with the stench of death. Broken weapons and discarded armor littered the ground. This was where Ronan's forces had first clashed with the rogues. He had won this skirmish, but the sheer brutality of the scene made her stomach clench. She followed the tracks, a wide swath of destruction leading further east. As she crested a small hill, she saw it in the valley below, the ruined fort where Fenris had made his stand. The sounds of battle, faint but unmistakable, drifted up to her. The clash of steel, the roars of enraged shifters, the screams of the dying. She had found them. Now she had to get through a war zone. Panic threatened to overwhelm her, but she forced it down. She skirted the edges of the fighting, using the cover of the forest, her small size and quiet movements an advantage. She saw flashes of the battle, Ronan's black and silver-clad warriors fighting with disciplined fury against a tide of ragged, wild-eyed rogues. She was looking for one person. She scanned the chaos, her eyes searching for the giant in black armor. She found him in the center of the fray, a whirlwind of destruction. He fought not with a sword, but with a massive war hammer that crushed armor and bone with equal ease. He was magnificent and terrifying, his movements a blur of deadly grace. But something was wrong. A dark aura, a visible shimmer of black energy pulsed around him with every blow he struck. His eyes, even from this distance, seemed to glow with an unnatural silver light. He was not just fighting. He was reveling in the violence. The curse was feeding. Cassian's plan was working. Suddenly, a massive grizzled wolf with a scarred snout, Fenris she assumed, broke through the line and launched itself at Ronan. Ronan met the charge, his hammer swinging, but two more rogues in wolf form flanked him, trying to drag him down. He was surrounded. At that moment, a figure on the ridge overlooking the battle caught her eye. It was Lord Cassian, watching the scene unfold with a satisfied smirk on his face. He was not fighting. He was observing, waiting for his nephew to either fall or fully succumb to the monster within. Ayla knew she was out of time. She could not reach Ronan through the fighting. But maybe she did not have to. She closed her eyes, blocking out the chaos, and focused all her will, all her being, on him. She thought of the peace of his study, the warmth of the fire, the quiet melody she hummed. She poured all of her calming energy, all of her desperate love, into an invisible thread connecting her to him. And then she began to sing. Not a hum, but a clear, soft song. One of her mother's old lullabies, a simple tune about a star finding its way home in the dark. Her voice was not loud, but it cut through the din of battle, a fragile thread of peace in a tapestry of violence. Ronan was lost in the red haze of battle. The beast was in control, a joyous, brutal thing that gloried in the crunch of bone and the spray of blood. The pain of the curse had vanished, replaced by an intoxicating surge of power. Every enemy he struck down fed the darkness, and the darkness, in turn, fed his strength. He was winning, but he was losing himself with every swing of his hammer. Fenris was a worthy opponent, a brute as strong as he was cunning. As they locked together, a whirlwind of hammer and claw, Ronan felt the last vestiges of his control slipping. The black tendrils of the curse were no longer just under his skin. They were beginning to manifest, wrapping around his gauntlets like living shadow. Then he heard it, a sound so out of place it shattered his battle lust. A song. Her song. He faltered, his hammer swing going wide. His head snapped up, searching for the source, and he saw her, standing on a small rise at the edge of the forest. Ayla. The sight of her was like a douse of icy water. What was she doing here? In this hellscape? The sheer, insane recklessness of it broke through the curse's hold. Fear, sharp, potent, and entirely for her, cleared his head. She was completely exposed. Fenris saw his distraction. The great wolf lunged, jaws snapping for his throat. Ronan reacted on pure instinct, shoving the wolf back, but his focus was shattered. He was no longer thinking about the battle, only about the fragile girl singing a lullaby in the middle of a war. Her voice, her presence, it was like an anchor for his soul. The raging storm inside him quieted, the red haze receded. But as the curse's power waned, the intoxicating strength it provided vanished with it. The pain returned, and his movements became sluggish, heavy. From his vantage point, Cassian saw the change. He saw Ronan falter, saw him look toward the girl. His eyes narrowed in fury. The Omega was ruining everything. She was not just a distraction. She was an antidote to the poison he had so carefully administered. "Kill the girl!" Cassian roared to a rogue archer near him. "Shoot the girl!" The archer, seeing Cassian's noble attire and assuming him to be a defector, knocked an arrow and took aim. Ronan saw the movement. He saw the archer, the drawn bow, the arrow pointed directly at Ayla. A primal roar of denial tore from his throat. Time seemed to slow down. He was too far away. He could never reach her in time. He did the only thing he could. He threw his warhammer. The massive weapon flew through the air, a blur of spinning steel. It was not aimed at the archer, but at a dead, heavy tree branch just above him. The hammer struck with incredible force, shearing the thick branch from the trunk. It crashed down, scattering the archer and two other rogues, the arrow flying harmlessly into the sky. But he was now disarmed, and Fenris was upon him. The wolf's claws tore through the leather plates on his shoulder, drawing blood. Ronan roared in pain, grappling with the beast, trying to keep its snapping jaws from his throat. He was weaker now, the curse suppressed by Ayla's song, and Fenris sensed his advantage. Gareth, seeing his king in trouble, finally fought his way to his side, his sword flashing as he engaged the other rogues surrounding them. But Ronan was locked in a life-or-death struggle with the rogue Alpha. And Ayla, seeing him wounded, seeing him sacrifice his only weapon for her, stopped singing. Her fear for him overwhelmed everything else. She started running towards him, down the hill and into the heart of the danger. Ayla ran, heedless of the danger. All she could see was Ronan, blood streaming from his shoulder, fighting for his life. The chaos of the battle was a blur around her. A rogue warrior loomed in her path, his face a mask of bloodlust, and raised his axe. Before he could strike, a black and silver warrior intercepted him, cutting him down. It was one of Ronan's guards, his eyes wide with disbelief at seeing her there. She reached the clearing where Ronan and Fenris battled. Ronan had the beast in a headlock, his muscles straining, but the wolf was immensely powerful, its claws tearing at his arms. "Ronan!" she cried out. He heard her voice, and his head turned for a fraction of a second. That was all the opening Fenris needed. The wolf twisted, breaking Ronan's hold and sinking its teeth deep into his leg. Ronan yelled in agony, his leg buckling beneath him. He fell to one knee. Fenris stood over him, jaws dripping with blood, preparing for the final, killing bite to the throat. Ayla did not think. She acted. She grabbed a fallen standard, a heavy wooden pole with a tattered banner, and charged. With a scream born of desperation and terror, she swung the heavy pole with all her might, striking the massive wolf across the snout. The blow was surprisingly effective. Fenris yelped in pain and surprise, shaking his head and stumbling back. It was the last thing he had expected. A tiny, scentless female attacking him with a stick. The sheer audacity of it momentarily stunned him. That moment was all Ronan needed. Ignoring the fire in his leg, he surged upwards, tackling the disoriented wolf. He was no longer fighting with the curse's dark power, but with the pure, desperate strength of an alpha protecting his mate. This was his fight. For his future. For her. He got his hands on the wolf's jaws and began to pull. It was a contest of raw, primal strength. Muscle strained against muscle, bone creaked. Fenris thrashed, his powerful body trying to throw Ronan off, but Ronan held on, his face a mask of grim determination. With a final guttural roar that seemed to shake the very ground, there was a sickening crack. Fenris went limp. Ronan shoved the body away and struggled to his feet, swaying, his leg bleeding profusely. The battle around them faltered, both sides staring in shock. Their leader was dead. The remaining rogues, their pack bond shattered, hesitated. Gareth seized the opportunity. "The pretender has fallen," he bellowed. "Surrender or die." Faced with the disciplined royal warriors and the terrifying image of the king who had just torn their alpha apart with his bare hands, the rogues broke. Some threw down their weapons, while others fled back into the forest. The battle was over. Ronan's eyes found Ayla's. He ignored Gareth, ignored his wounded warriors, and limped towards her. He looked like a nightmare, covered in blood, his own and his enemies'. But his eyes were clear. They were the eyes of the man she knew, filled with a terrifying, fierce relief. He reached her and pulled her into his arms, his grip bruisingly tight. He buried his face in her hair, inhaling her scent as if it were air and he had been drowning. "You foolish, insane, wonderful woman," he rasped into her ear, his voice thick with emotion. "What were you thinking?" "I was thinking you were in trouble," she whispered into his chest, her body trembling with the aftermath of her terror. He pulled back, his hands framing her face. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and the whole world seemed to fall away. There was no king, no Omega, only a man and a woman who had just saved each other. "You saved me," he said, his voice full of wonder, "not just from Fenris, from myself." And then, in the middle of the blood-soaked battlefield, surrounded by his victorious warriors and his vanquished enemies, King Ronan lowered his head and kissed her. It was not a gentle kiss. It was desperate, possessive, a claim. It was the taste of blood and relief and the undeniable, irrevocable sealing of their bond. The return to the citadel was a strange mix of triumph and tension. Ronan's victory was absolute, and the tale of how the wolfless Omega had saved the king was already spreading like wildfire, whispered in tones of awe and disbelief. Ayla rode in a litter, a concession Ronan had insisted upon, while he rode beside her, refusing any aid for his own injuries beyond a hastily wrapped bandage. He rarely let her out of his sight. Lord Cassian had vanished. He had slipped away during the chaos of the battle's end, a snake slithering back into the shadows. Ronan knew his uncle was behind it all, but without proof, he could not move against him openly. The political game was not over. They arrived back at the citadel to a subdued welcome. The court was uncertain. They had a victorious king, but he had brought back the wolfless Omega, and now treated her not as a servant, but as a treasured consort. It defied all their traditions. Ronan took Ayla directly to his chambers, barring the door to everyone, including the healers. He trusted no one. "Let me see to your leg," Ayla said, her voice firm. He sank into a chair, his face pale from pain and exhaustion. "It is nothing." "It is not nothing," she insisted, kneeling before him and gently unwrapping the blood-soaked bandage. The teeth marks were deep, the flesh torn and angry. "This needs to be cleaned and stitched." She went to work with a quiet efficiency she had learned in the Silverwood Infirmary. She washed the wound, her touch gentle, and prepared a needle and thread. As she worked, he watched her, his expression a mixture of pain and wonder. "You were not afraid," he said. "Back there, you ran at a wolf 3 times your size with a stick." "I was terrified," she admitted, not looking up from her task. "But I was more afraid of losing you." Her simple, honest confession struck him deeper than any sword could. He reached out and gently touched her hair. "No one has ever fought for me before, Ayla. They fight for the crown, for the kingdom, not for the man." "I do not care about the crown," she said, tying off the last stitch. "I care about you." She looked up at him then, and the connection between them was a living, breathing thing in the room. The mate bond, now fully awakened, hummed in the space between them. It was a deep, resonant pull, a feeling of rightness, of coming home. "Ayla," he began, his voice hoarse, "what I am about to show you, I have shown no one. It is the source of the curse, the reason for my darkness." He closed his eyes. The air in the room grew cold. The shadows in the corners seemed to deepen and stretch. A faint, black mist began to seep from his pores, coalescing around him. The shadowy tendrils she had seen hints of before were now terrifyingly real, writhing like serpents made of solidified night. They wrapped around his arms and torso, and his face contorted in agony. This was his secret. The curse was not just an internal pain, it was a physical manifestation of dark, parasitic magic. "It feeds on negative emotion," he gasped, fighting to speak. "Rage, fear, despair. The battle gave it a feast. Cassian knew it would. It wants to consume me, to turn me into a mindless puppet of shadow and rage." Isla looked at the horrifying display, at the man in the center of it, and she felt no fear. Only a profound, overwhelming wave of love and compassion. This was his wound. This was the monster he fought every day. She did not back away. She moved closer. She reached out and placed her hands on his cheeks, her thumbs stroking his temples. The shadowy tendrils recoiled from her touch as if burned. "Then we will starve it," she said, her voice a bedrock of calm in his storm. She leaned in and pressed her forehead against his. She did not hum or sing. She simply opened her spirit to his, pouring all of her quiet strength, her unwavering acceptance, her love directly into him. It was not a fight against the darkness. It was an infusion of light. She showed him how she saw him, not as a monster, but as a man. Strong, burdened, and worthy of love. The writhing shadows faltered. They began to recede, sinking back into his skin, not with the violence of a defeated foe, but with the quiet resignation of a tide going out. The oppressive cold in the room vanished. Ronan's breathing evened out. He opened his eyes, and the silver depths were clear of pain. He looked at her with an expression of pure, unadulterated awe. "How?" he whispered. "I told you," she said, a small smile gracing her lips. "You are not alone in this fight anymore." He pulled her into his arms, holding her not with the desperation of the battlefield, but with a reverence that made her heart ache. He knew, with absolute certainty, that this wolfless Omega was not his weakness. She was his salvation, his mate, his queen. The next day, Ronan summoned the entire court to the throne room. Whispers followed Ayla as she walked at his side, her simple woolen dress a stark contrast to the silks and velvets of the court ladies. They stared at her, this wolfless nobody who now held the king's favor. She held her head high, drawing strength from Ronan's solid presence beside her. Ronan took his seat on the throne, with Ayla standing on the dais beside him, a position of honor no one had ever occupied. The message was clear and shocking. Lord Cassian was there, standing with the council, his face a mask of polite neutrality. But Ayla could see the fury simmering in his eyes. "I have called you here to witness a new beginning," Ronan announced, his voice echoing through the silent hall. "For too long, our kingdom has valued only one kind of strength, the strength of the claw, the tooth, the sword. We have become hard, brittle. We have forgotten the strength of the heart, of the spirit." He gestured to Ayla. "This woman, Ayla of the Silverwood Pack, was sent to me as a broken tribute." "Your Alpha," he said, his icy gaze finding the visiting envoy from her pack. "Saw her as worthless because she is wolfless. You were all blind. You saw a flaw where you should have seen a gift." He rose from his throne and took Ayla's hand. "At the Battle of the Black Fort, when my own rage threatened to consume me, it was her courage that saved us. Her strength, A quiet power you cannot measure in blood anchored my soul and won the day. She is not my weakness. She is the heart of my kingdom. A shocked gasp rippled through the court. I know there are those among you, Ronan continued, his gaze sweeping the room and landing squarely on Cassian, who see this as a perversion of our ways. Those who whisper of tainted blood and weakness on the throne. These voices seek to divide us, to drag us back into the darkness of infighting and suspicion for their own gain. Cassian's composure finally cracked. Your Majesty, this is madness. She is an Omega, a defective one. She has no lineage, no power. She will pollute the royal bloodline, the traditions. Your traditions are chains that have kept us stagnant, Ronan thundered, his power flaring, silencing his uncle instantly. Our bloodline is not polluted by her. It is redeemed by her, for she is my mate. The final declaration landed like a physical blow. Mate, the sacred, fated bond between the Alpha King and the wolfless Omega. It was unthinkable. Ronan pulled Ayla closer, his voice softening but losing none of its authority. She is my mate, chosen for me by the great moon itself. She will be my queen and your Luna. You will show her the same respect you show me. Anyone who defies this, anyone who harms or insults her, will answer to me directly. Their life will be forfeit. He then did something that shattered the last remnants of their rigid society. He knelt. On one knee, before the entire court, the Alpha King knelt before the wolfless Omega. Ayla, he said, his voice for her alone, will you accept me? Will you rule by my side? Tears welled in her eyes. The girl who had been shamed, sold, and scorned was being offered a crown. But more than that, she was being offered a heart, a future, a home. Yes, she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. Yes, Ronan. I will. He rose, and before his stunned court he leaned down and performed the most sacred of rituals. He bared his teeth and gently, reverently, marked the juncture of her neck and shoulder. The bite was a spark of fire, a searing claim that sent a wave of pure bliss through her. The mate bond settled, a permanent, unbreakable link between their souls. The entire court could feel the shift, the immense power of the bond solidifying, radiating from the dais. He was hers, she was his. And together, they would face whatever came next. The court was in turmoil, but Ronan's decree was absolute. Ayla was now the Luna Queen, and a new era had begun. The changes were immediate. Ayla, with Ronan's full support, began to dismantle the cruel hierarchies that had defined their society. She started with the Omegas. She established a new council, run by Omegas themselves, to oversee their welfare, ensuring they were treated with respect and not as property. She opened schools for the young, teaching not just battle strategy but history, art, and the healing arts. Her focus was on nurturing the pack, not just arming it. Many of the old guard, loyal to Cassian and the old ways, resisted. But many more, especially the lower-ranking members of the pack who had long suffered under the rigid system, embraced the changes with fervent hope. They saw in Ayla a compassion their leaders had never shown. They did not see a wolfless queen. They saw a queen with a heart. Ayla found her own power not in command, but in connection. She would walk through the citadel, speaking with guards, cooks, and stable hands. She listened to their troubles, learned their names, and offered solutions. Her calming presence worked its magic on a larger scale, soothing old feuds and easing the anxieties of a kingdom in transition. Ronan watched her, his love and admiration growing every day. She was a natural leader, her strength quiet but unyielding. With her by his side, the curse's hold on him weakened daily. The darkness still lingered, a shadow in the corner of his soul, but it no longer had the power to consume him. Ayla's love was a constant, steady light that kept it at bay. Their nights were their sanctuary. In the privacy of their chambers, the king and queen would shed their titles. He was just Ronan, and she was just Ayla. She would tell him stories, and he would tell her of his dreams for the kingdom, a place of justice and prosperity, not just fear and strength. "You have healed me in more ways than you know," he confessed one night, tracing the mating mark on her neck with his finger. "I spent my whole life believing I was a monster, just waiting for the day the darkness would win. You walked into that darkness and lit a candle." "You were never the monster, Ronan," she said, cupping his scarred face. "You were just a man fighting alone in the dark. Now you have me to help hold the light." But Cassian was not done. He had been stripped of his council seat and confined to his estates, but his influence still festered. He saw the kingdom changing, saw his nephew finding a happiness and stability Cassian believed he did not deserve. His hatred curdled into a final desperate plan. If he could not have the throne, he would see it all burn. He sought out the remnants of Fenris's pack, using his wealth and promises of power to gather them. And he delved into forbidden lore, seeking a way to not just trigger Ronan's curse, but to make it permanent, to unleash the entity his ancestors had bargained with, and turn Ronan into an uncontrollable force of destruction that would tear his own kingdom apart. He found what he was looking for: a ritual that required a blood sacrifice and an artifact of great power, an artifact hidden deep within the citadel itself. The attack came during the festival of the winter solstice. It was a night of celebration, a symbol of the new era of hope Ayla had ushered in. The great hall was filled with music and laughter for the first time in a generation. Ronan sat on his throne with Ayla beside him, a rare, genuine smile on his face as he watched his people celebrate. Suddenly, the great doors burst open. Lord Cassian stood there, flanked by a score of the most hardened rogue warriors. His face was twisted in a triumphant sneer. "The party is over, nephew," he announced, his voice ringing with malice. The royal guard moved instantly, forming a protective wall around the throne. Ronan was on his feet, shoving Ayla behind him, his body a living shield. A low growl rumbled in his chest. "Cassian, you are a traitor. You will die for this." "Perhaps," Cassian said, his eyes glittering with madness, "but I will not die alone." He held up a black, jagged shard of obsidian that seemed to drink the light from the room. "Do you recognize this, Ronan? It is the heart of the altar where our ancestor made his dark pact, the key to unleashing your full potential." He began to chant in a guttural, ancient language. The obsidian shard began to glow with a sickly purple light. The rogue warriors charged, crashing into the line of the royal guard, and the great hall erupted into a bloody brawl. Ronan felt it instantly, a pain 1,000 times worse than anything he had ever felt before. It was not a slow burn, but an explosion. The curse, supercharged by the ritual, tore through him. He screamed, a sound of pure agony, and fell to his knees. "Ronan!" Ayla cried, trying to get to him, but Gareth held her back. "Stay back, my queen. It is not safe." The black, shadowy tendrils erupted from Ronan's body, no longer misty or ethereal, but thick and solid, like living whips of obsidian. His body began to contort, his bones cracking and reforming. His skin darkened to a stony gray, and his eyes burned with violet fire. He was transforming, not into a wolf, but into the monstrous entity the curse was meant to contain. He was losing himself. Cassian laughed, a high, unhinged sound. "Behold your true king! A being of pure power, pure rage. Now destroy them all. Destroy everything you have built." The monstrous form of Ronan rose to its full, terrifying height. It let out a roar that was not animal or human, but something ancient and terrible. It looked at the fighting, at the chaos, with unseeing eyes. It was a puppet of the curse, a vessel for destruction. Then Cassian made his final fatal mistake. To prove his control, he pointed a finger at Ayla. "Start with her," he commanded the beast. "Kill your mate. Show them all that love is weakness." The creature turned its head, its burning eyes fixing on Ayla. It took a step towards her. Ayla's heart stopped. This was it. The end. But then, something miraculous happened. Deep within the monster's violet eyes, a flicker of silver appeared. A spark of the real Ronan. He saw Cassian pointing at Ayla. He saw the threat to his mate. And the man, buried deep inside the monster, fought back. The creature stopped. It let out a roar of conflict, clutching its head. It was at war with itself. The curse, commanded by Cassian, pushed it to kill. But the soul of Ronan, bound to Ayla by the unbreakable mate bond, refused. In that moment of clarity, Ronan made the ultimate choice. He knew he could not defeat the curse from the inside, not while it was this powerful. But he could protect her. He turned his back on Ayla, facing Cassian. With a surge of will that must have cost him everything, he took control of his monstrous body for a single, final act. He ignored the royal guards, ignored the rogues. He lunged, not at Ayla, but at his uncle. Cassian's eyes widened in shock and terror. He had lost control. Before he could react, the creature that was Ronan seized him. But it did not kill him. Instead, it shielded Ayla with its own massive body, turning to face the guards who were now moving in. Seeing only a monster that needed to be put down. He was choosing to take the blades meant for the monster, to sacrifice himself to give her a chance to escape. He chose to protect her above his own survival, above his own power. He chose her. "No," Ayla screamed, breaking free from Gareth's hold. She saw what he was doing. He was sacrificing himself, positioning his monstrous form to take the brunt of the guard's attack to protect her. She ran to him, ignoring the swords and the chaos. She threw her arms around his massive, stony leg, the only part of him she could reach. "Ronan, do not do this. Fight it. I am here." Her touch, her voice. It was the final anchor he needed. The flicker of silver in the beast's eyes flared, battling against the overwhelming violet. The creature froze, caught between its program directive and its soul's imperative. Ayla looked up at the tormented being he had become. She saw past the monstrous exterior to the man trapped within. She knew what she had to do. Starving the curse was no longer enough. It had to be purged. She pressed her face against his cold, hard skin. She closed her eyes and did not just project calm. She poured her entire being, her very life force, into the mate bond. She sent him every memory they had shared. Their first meeting, her stories by the fire, his hand on her cheek, their kiss on the battlefield. She sent him all the love in her soul, a tidal wave of pure, unconditional acceptance. She was not just soothing the monster, she was embracing it. She was loving all of him, the man and the beast, the light and the dark. "I love you," she whispered against his skin. "All of you. Come back to me." Her love, her complete acceptance of his entire being, was the one thing the ancient dark entity could not comprehend. It was a power greater than its own. It was a key that unlocked the curse's very foundation. A brilliant golden light erupted from Ayla, flowing into Ronan. It was the light of her spirit, pure and fierce. The light surged through him, targeting the writhing black energy of the curse. The shadows hissed and recoiled, burning away not in fire, but in the face of a power they could not corrupt. The monstrous form began to crumble, not into dust, but into light. The stony gray skin dissolved. The violet fire in his eyes was extinguished, replaced by the warm, familiar silver. The shadowy tendrils evaporated into nothingness. He collapsed, the transformation reversing itself, leaving Ronan, the man, kneeling on the floor, gasping for breath. He was whole. The curse, the ancient darkness that had plagued his family for generations, was gone. She could feel it. The space inside him where it had lived was now filled with a clean, quiet peace. He looked at her, his eyes full of a love so profound it took her breath away. Ayla. The battle in the hall had stopped. Everyone, guards, rogues, courtiers, stared in stunned silence at the miracle they had just witnessed. Cassian, dropped during the transformation, scrambled for the glowing obsidian shard. "No! It is not possible!" he shrieked. Before anyone could move, Serena, Ayla's sister, who had arrived with a delegation from Silverwood just that morning, stepped out of the crowd. In her hand was a silver dagger. In one fluid warrior's motion, she threw it. The blade flew true, embedding itself in Cassian's chest. He looked down at it, a shocked expression on his face, before collapsing, the light in the obsidian shard dying with him. "No one threatens my sister," Serena said, her voice ringing with protective fury. The fight was over. The traitor was dead. The curse was broken. Ronan pulled Ayla into his arms, holding her as if he would never let her go. "You did it," he whispered in awe. "You really did it. You saved me." "We saved each other," she corrected, her tears of relief finally falling. In the center of the great hall, surrounded by the wreckage of the old world, the king and his wolfless queen held each other, their bond not just solidified, but sanctified. They were the beginning of a new song, a new story for their people, one where the greatest strength was not the power to destroy, but the courage to love. The kingdom was reborn. With Cassian's treachery exposed and the king's curse broken by the love of his wolfless mate, the old ways crumbled for good. The story of that night became a legend, a testament to a new kind of power. Ayla was no longer the Luna Queen out of duty or decree. She was revered, loved by the people as their savior. Ronan, free from the darkness for the first time in his life, ruled with a wisdom and compassion he had never been able to fully embrace. The hardness in him was gone, replaced by a steady, confident strength. He and Ayla ruled side by side, their skills perfectly complementing one another. He was the sword and shield of the kingdom. She was its heart and soul. Serena was honored for her role in stopping Cassian and was made the new captain of the Royal Guard, a position she accepted with fierce pride. The bond between the two sisters, once strained by pity and shame, was now forged in mutual respect and love. The Silverwood Pack, shamed by their former alpha's blindness, deposed him and begged their Luna Queen for forgiveness, which she freely gave. Her only request was that they treat their Omegas and their imperfect members with the dignity they deserved. Their union did more than just change their kingdom. It sent ripples throughout the shifter world. The tale of the Alpha King and his wolfless queen challenged the very definition of what it meant to be strong. 1 year later, Ayla stood on the balcony of their chambers, looking out over the peaceful, prosperous city. The mountain air was crisp and clean. Strong arms wrapped around her from behind, and she leaned back into the solid warmth of her husband's chest. "What is my beautiful queen thinking about?" Ronan murmured, pressing a kiss to the mating mark on her neck. "About how much can change in a year," she said, her hand resting on her swollen belly. "A year ago, I was a broken tribute being sent to a monster." "And I was a monster waiting for a miracle," he finished for her, his own hand coming to rest protectively over hers on their unborn child. "And I got one." His wolf, once a raging beast, was now a calm, steady presence within him, and it purred in contentment whenever he was near his mate and their pup. He had shifted for the first time without pain a month after the curse broke, his wolf, a magnificent black creature as large as legend claimed, but with wise, gentle silver eyes, his eyes. A small cry came from the nursery inside. "I think our son is awake," Ayla said, smiling. They had been blessed with a son 3 months prior, a strong, healthy boy with his father's black hair and, to everyone's surprise, his mother's calm, empathetic spirit. He did not have the overwhelming, aggressive aura of a typical alpha pup. He was peaceful, observant, and the pack already adored him. He was the perfect synthesis of his parents. "Let him cry for a moment," Ronan said, holding her tighter. "Let me have my mate to myself for just a little longer." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in vibrant hues of orange and gold. The kingdom was safe. Their family was whole. The shame that had once been Ayla's constant companion was a distant memory, replaced by a love so profound it had reshaped the world. She, the wolfless Omega, had not just found her place. She had created a new one for herself and for everyone who had ever been told they were not enough. And in the arms of her king, her mate, her Ronin, she was finally, completely home.